we were talking about the challenge that if I were given all power, I would immediately solve all of the problems in the world, especially those that have to do with human suffering. And the implication was, or the point of the question was, if God exists in the Christian sense of the word, and what I mean by that is an infinite, all-powerful, good God, if a truly good and all-powerful God exists, it is simply incomprehensible that he would not immediately solve all physical problems, especially those that bring human suffering in this world. In the last presentation, I tried to show that the atheist approach to this question, at least the extreme atheist approach to this question, which is that human suffering is incompatible with the idea of God, and therefore God does not exist, or it's unreasonable to think that God exists, in my view, is a self-referentially absurd position. What I mean by that is the atheist is saying, essentially appealing to our sense of justice. It is unjust for God not to eradicate all evil from the world. Evil exists in the world, so there must not be a just or good or perfect God. And so the argument I was trying to make in the past presentation was that this is an undermining position. The argument, in order to be valid, is based upon the idea that there is such a thing as objective justice in the world. That there has to be objective good in order to show that what we have in the world is objectively evil, and it's incompatible with the idea of God. So in other words, God is being judged as being immoral or not doing what is good. This assumes there's such a thing as an objective good that God is not living up to. It's objectively good for a being to get rid of all cancer. God is not doing that, therefore God must not exist. But the irony of it is that the atheist position is that there is no supreme basis of goodness. There is no supreme standard of what is right and wrong. In the very discussion that I'm referring to, the atheists basically argue there is no objective standard of goodness, and therefore goodness is relative. They argued for a moral relativism, and that morality, they argued a social contract theory, is basically a contrived or artificial construct. So that what is moral is simply what we determine to be pragmatically useful or what we find personally to be desirable. But there is no objective morality or any objective good. What I mean by objective is good regardless of how I feel about it or whether I want it or not. And so in this case, God is being condemned or declared unjust or not good because of the atheist system of presumably objective good that they are imposing on God, and God is not living up to it, therefore God can't exist. What I submit to you is that that's borrowing from Christian principles, or at least theistic principles. It's borrowing from the idea that there's a basis of objective good and God fails when compared to that system of objective good. Now, the next point that I wanted to make, and in that sense, just to finish that point, in that sense, the atheist position, I think, is self-defeating. It undermines itself. It becomes logically incoherent after you analyze it and think about it on its own terms. Now, to go to the second part of what I want to talk about in respect to this particular question, is that we could take a different approach to the existence of suffering and evil in the world. Instead of saying that all evil in the world, or suffering rather, is evil and therefore unjustifiable, we might take the position that some suffering and evil, or perhaps all of it in some ultimate sense, serves some higher purpose. And I suggested that at the end of my last presentation on this subject. For example, there are certain kinds of sufferings. I think this is especially easy to see with. For example, if I put my hand too close to a fire, it will hurt. And so there's a suffering that comes from that. This is actually a good kind of suffering because it warns me of some type of danger. Perhaps certain symptoms that we have that cause physical suffering to us tell us that there's a problem. And maybe because of that problem, a problem can be solved. So a person might have an ailment of body, let's say their side hurts, and they go to the doctor and find out that their appendix is about to rupture, and so they're able to save them potential death by removing the appendix. So there are certain kinds of suffering that are very good for us because they warn us of a problem that we should avoid. There are other kinds of suffering that perhaps on a deeper level provide some type of deeper deepening of the human person and therefore are good in that sense, or at least they aid in our good. For example, I know of, take for instance, people who suffer from addictions. I know people who have had very terrible life experiences, and now they're serving as counselors to other people who suffer, and they're able to take their experience of addiction or perhaps abuse or something like that. And it has deepened their sense of life. And often they are very grateful people. They're very loving people. They're very caring people. And so the question that we might ask is, of course, the suffering that they experience, just considered in isolation from everything else, is a very horrible thing and something that saddens us to see. But on the other hand, often we see that the pains that human beings experience can be brought into some type of service to a higher good or to some deepening of human experience. Now, I'm not going to suggest for one moment that I can even begin to offer an explanation of every kind of suffering that human beings experience and say that I can tell you why that happened and what it serves or the higher good that it serves. All that I'm suggesting here is that we can see, sometimes at least, where the sufferings that we experience as human beings create a deepening of our character, or they warn us of some impending danger or something negative that perhaps is happening. And all of this is helping us, or that it serves something better that we are experiencing through it. Now, if that's the case, even though I can't figure out the purpose of all suffering, I could take two different approaches at this point. I could say that because I can't figure out why people are suffering or why bad things are happening to good people or to people in general, if I can't figure out why or what these things serve, what higher purpose are they serving, what meaning is being accomplished through these experiences of suffering that people have, I might take the path at that point to say that because I can't figure it out, therefore there is no higher purpose. There is no higher good that's being achieved in it. It seems to me that that presupposes that I, in my current state of knowledge, understand what goods could be achieved through every kind of suffering. And that strikes me as being arrogant. It strikes me as being beyond the capacities of human beings. I don't know. My knowledge of things is very, very small and narrow. And because of the limitations of my knowledge, it seems to me far beyond my abilities as a creature and as a limited being of limited knowledge and limited experience to declare with certainty that the sufferings that are being experienced in this world have no higher purpose, that they serve no higher end or goal through the allowance of these types of sufferings. I'm not in a position to say that. I can't give you all the answers to it, nor can anyone else. I don't think in this world give you an answer to all the reasons for human suffering, but I can at least sometimes see that there is a meaning or a purpose in it, and so I cannot rule out from the start that there is a higher purpose being achieved through the allowance of all these sufferings, that something more glorious is coming about through the sort of aches and pains of human history and cosmic history. Some higher good is going to grow out of that is greater than if it had not been allowed to happen. Perhaps because it allows the expression of human freedom, because perhaps it deepens the character, it gives individual identity to people. That can be very painful, obviously, and is very painful. But perhaps there is some higher good that is emerging out of that we will see in retrospect when we look back upon it. The atheist excludes that as a possible explanation of all human suffering. I don't think they're in a position to make that determination. I don't think human beings are in a position to make that determination. So what is the alternative to that? The alternative is that I say that creatures are, as I've said, not in a position to make that determination, and therefore, if God exists, and I think we have good reason to believe God exists, if God exists, then all human suffering, all animal suffering, all of the struggles and aches of world history and cosmic history are allowed by God, because God ultimately, being infinitely wise and infinitely good, is going to be able to bring healing to the world, and he's able to show in retrospect, we will be able to see that all these things serve a higher purpose. Perhaps I can conclude with one thought. It seems to me as a Christian that we have, I think, the most powerful ultimate answer to this question that we can have in this world. And that is in our belief that in our struggle to try to make sense out of what this mystery that we call life really means, God has come near to us in human history, in time and space, at a point in Jesus. At a single point in a single person, God comes and dwells with us. And when he does, when God comes to dwell with us, he comes and dwells with us in the midst of human suffering. And he shares in human suffering. And now today, for untold millions of people, the Christian symbol, the supreme Christian symbol, is the cross, a symbol of humiliation, of suffering, of death. But that suffering and death becomes a sign of hope to all the world. That event of suffering has been integrated into a higher purpose that many people are now benefiting from and brings hope to them. Even though it's a great evil on one level, on another level, it is a supreme evil that has been turned into the service of supreme good. And is it possible that all human suffering could be drawn up into that sort of meaning that is expressed to us in Christ? I, as a Christian, believe that that is so. I don't think the atheist's rejection of God is a necessary or even a desirable move in this discussion, because it ultimately refutes itself and takes away all basis of objective moral judgments altogether.